Welcome back to part 4 of the Snake, Tree, and Eagle series. This video's focus will be on the various symbols that represent aspects of mystical union, as well as describing the after effects of having such an experience. As usual, I will be also presenting texts from the canonical Gospels, Gnostic texts, and texts from other Christian mystics. We'll be diving into the hidden meaning of symbols and how they more often than not refer to mystical union through the lens of their own cultures. Without further ado, let's start with a symbol of the eagle, or dove, in the case of Christianity. Before I continue, I want to stress that what I described at the moment of mystical union of unfurling wings around the head is directly related to the eagle symbol of the series. As I related in the last video, when both polarities lock into place and the energy from the mouth of God, or the medulla oblongata, comes around both sides of the head to meet at the frontal lobe or third eye, it physically feels like wings unfurling around one's head. The symbolism of wings around a sun disk or any other ancient character is depicting this experience through symbolism. I am aware now that the feeling of mystical union is probably electrical charges surging through both sides of my brain, meeting at my frontal lobe, creating a, quote, burning bush effect. The dove is the Christian symbol in the Gospels, and as we can see from ancient depictions of baptism, we often see a watery light substance above his head, leading to the sky with a dove right in the middle descending on top of his head, a clear symbol for spiritual baptism. I think the symbol of the dove means more than what people have granted it due to the fact that they have never experienced mystical union. Let us put the iconography aside for a moment and take a look at what Mark 1:9-10 actually says. Now in those days Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan River. And just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens splitting apart and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. There is no actual dove, but it is an expression of the feeling of spiritual baptism with unfurling wings around the head that I have just explained. This is a sacred moment in a person's spiritual journey, so by taking into account for a moment the importance of this description of, quote, descending on him like a dove, unquote, which is an expression of the moment of mystical union, what if the scene of Jesus overthrowing the money changers in the temple has a completely different meaning? I believe that there is a more profound esoteric message in that section of Mark 11. Cleansing the temple. Then they came to Jerusalem. Jesus entered the temple area and began to drive out those who were selling and buying in the temple courts. He turned over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves, and he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. In John, Jesus' condemnation of specifically selling doves is striking since John actually mentions other animals, but it's the dove that his gospel emphasizes. To those who sold the doves, he said, "Take these things away from here. Do not make my Father's house a marketplace." The obvious part that everyone takes away from this is the blasphemy of turning a profit from regular people who come to the temple for worship and prayer, but the selling of the doves, the only merchandise named specifically, is a euphemism for selling fake spirituality on a purely physical level. Mocking the sacred symbol of mystical union by selling and killing its physical representation is a sacrilege to Jesus. It's like when the Catholic Church sold special indulgences to people to guarantee their entrance into heaven during the Middle Ages. That is, if you could afford it. It is the ultimate heresy to offer something spiritually fake versus spiritually authentic. I believe that this is what is truly being emphasized in this part of the story. Where Mark's Gospel has a more subtle way of expressing this, Matthew 23:13 explicitly denigrates the priest class for keeping genuine spiritual connection from themselves and people alike. But woe to you, experts in the law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You keep locking people out of the kingdom of heaven, for you neither enter nor permit those trying to enter to go in. Here we have an excerpt from the Gnostic Apocryphon of John, directly relating the eagle with the knowledge, or Gnosis. And our sister Sophia is she who came down in innocence in order to rectify her deficiency. Therefore she was called Life, which is the mother of the living, by the foreknowledge of the sovereignty of heaven, and through her They have tasted the perfect knowledge. I appeared in the form of an eagle on the tree of knowledge, which is the epinoia, thought, from the foreknowledge of the pure light, that I might teach them and awaken them out of the depths of sleep. For they were both in a fallen state, and they recognized their likeness. The epinoia, thought, appeared to them as light. She awakened their thinking. Again, in the Gospel of Philip, we have a reference of mystical union that basically acknowledges that the ego, being all but obliterated during spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross, the ego flees to the lower aeon chakras below the, quote, wings of the cross, unquote, and under its arms, i.e., the baser levels of materiality in the lower three aeon chakras. But it also directly references commingling submergence in the spiritual water, as I described it when it says, quote, when the flood of water surges over them, unquote. The mysteries of truth are revealed, though in type and image. The bridal chamber, however, remains hidden. It is the holy in the holy, the veil at first concealed, how God controlled the creation. But when the veil is rent and the things inside are revealed, this house will be left desolate, or rather will be destroyed, and the whole inferior Godhead, the ego, will flee from there, but not into the Holy of Holies, for it will not be able to mix with the unmixed light and the flawless fullness, but will be under the wings of the cross and under its arms. This ark will be their salvation when the flood of waters surges over them. This idea of the cross being a dividing line between matter and spirit is well represented in this last excerpt from the Gospel of Philip. If we bring this concept back to India, we find an interesting corollary in the Shiva Sutras. That Sakti who is described as supreme and subtle and beyond the pale of religious practices like worship, meditation, etc., enclosing within herself the central Vindu, sleeps coiled up in the form of a snake. O illustrious Uma, sleeping there, she is thoroughly incognizant, having cast within her womb the moon, fire, the sun, the stars, and the 14 worlds. She appears as if senseless owing to poison. Then, O fair one, she gets awakened by the throb of the highest knowledge being churned by the Vindu, Shiva's viral drop of light present in her womb. The churning goes on with the whirling force in the body of the Sakti, till with the penetration of Shiva's Bindu there appear at first many light drops of great splendor. When the subtle circular Sakti is aroused by that creative throb of knowledge, then, O dear one, the powerful four-phased Vindu existing in the womb of Sakti assumes a straight position by the union of their churner and that which is churned. The Sakti that passes into the middle of the two Vindus is known as Jayatha. Being agitated by that Vindu, the straight line is known as Amrita Kundali. She is known as a Rakini, one of the straight line, at the ends of which are the two Vindus, i.e. Shiva and Shakti. She is known as the Tripatha, having the three tracks, and is named Rajri. She is also named Rodini because she stands as a bar to the path to liberation. Here we have an explanation of Rodini, or the bar in the mystical cross achieving liberation. Rodini is the dividing line between phenomena and noumena. On the lower side of this dividing line is the empirical manifestation. On the other or higher side of that line is the meta-empirical manifestation. Rodini acts as a bar between the two. Only those who are completely purified are allowed to cross the bar. Again, we have an almost identical concept of the mystical cross coming from two completely different texts and religious thought. As I demonstrated in part 2 of this series, the early Christians had a spiritual system not so different from those we find in India. Significantly, both have the same symbol of the cross as part of their systems. The Egyptian Ankh is an exact symbolic reference to this experience. It is interesting that the Ankh means breath and life, and often the Egyptian gods are seen holding them in their hands. The lotus headdresses are symbolic of the outflowing energy from the top of the head and the snake or uraeus coming out of the forehead, representing this as well. But more importantly, the top of the Ankh is an oval shape, referring to the second polarity around the head, through which one experiences the outward flow of the experience of mystical union. Directly related to this is the circle with a star or dot in the middle. In Sumerian, the sign for God is a star or the Dingir sign, and they also have the winged sun disk with the sacred tree as we see in the cylinder impression, which is significant. Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom that lives in the subterranean fresh waters, is often depicted as having rivers flowing from him with fish. In Egypt, we also have the sun disk and, more importantly, the winged sun disk. Take note that all sun disks are always placed above the head, often with wings, bullhorns, or snakes surrounding it. A simple winged sun disk on its own encapsulates the mystical union in its symbology of the second and most important polarity. Even the hieroglyph for God in Egypt uses the symbol of the circle and the dot or star. There is also the so-called Talpiot tomb, what's known as the Jesus family tomb, where outside is carved a chevron and a circle with a dot in the middle. We can find that symbol in Carthaginian and Phoenician sites as well. As we saw in the introduction video I did 4 years ago, we had many examples of what seemed like a callback to the circle and the dot. One of the other symbols that encapsulates the mystical union is the caduceus. You have the two snakes representing opposing energies coming together, going up a rod with a ball at the top, which represents the backbone with the medulla oblongata at the top, and finally the wings representing the moment of mystical connection, as I went over in the previous video. This symbol is often attributed to the Greek Hermes, but it goes back to Sumerian and Akkadian symbolism, as I showed in the introductory video. In Christian iconography and artwork, many people have halos, but Christ always has the cross right behind his head, exactly where I have explained is the meeting of the mystical cross at the medulla oblongata. The circle and the star over a dark blue background is what one sees in their mind's eye, or spiritual vision, right before mystical union occurs, as I explained in the last video. We mentioned Simon Magus' system in part 2 of this series, and I would like to quote from G.R.S.R. Mead's essay from Simon Magus. In this excerpt, we have a description of mystical union that speaks directly to this. That Yahweh, thy Elohim, is a consuming fire. This we said to the companions, that it is a fire which devours fire, and it is a fire which devours itself and consumes itself, because it is a fire which is more mighty than fire. It has been so confirmed. Come see, in the flame which goes up are two lights. One light is bright white, and one light is united with a dark or blue. The white light is that which is above and ascends in a straight path, and that below is that dark or blue light. And this light below is the throne to the white light, and that white light rests upon it. And they unite one to the other so that they are one. And this dark light or blue color, which is below, is the precious throne to the white, and this is the mystery of the blue. And this blue dark throne unites itself with another thing to light that from below. This awakens it to unite with the upper white light, and this blue or dark sometimes changes its color, but that white above never changes its color. It is always white, but that blue changes to these different colors, sometimes blue or black and sometimes a red color. And this unites itself to two sides. It unites to the above, to that white upper light, and it unites itself below to that thing which is under it, which is the burning matter, and this burns and consumes away the matter below. I would also be remiss if I didn't bring back some of the symbolism I showed in the introduction video from 4 years ago. The first thing is the Linga from India. The Linga is a three-dimensional expression of samadhi or mystical union, as we call it in the West. In a way, it's their own cross. In this diagram, we can see the energetic aspects of the Linga. As I expressed in my description of having a mystical union experience, the energy flows out of the top of the head and out of the forehead, with the body being submerged under the quote-unquote spiritual waters. We also see the oval shape holding the upright shape of the Linga. This diagram shows the divine energy or Shakti flowing in and out of where the forehead is at the tip of the yoni, and above the Linga is the outflowing energy, the Shanti or eternal peace. Finally, the flowing energy of bliss that overflows the entire Linga as well as outward from the third eye, located at the tip of the yoni. In the last video, I explained that one sees the shimmering light of the separated waters with your naked eyes after mystical union. The next few excerpts I have chosen in this section are meant to show all of you that the details I provided in my testimony are expressed in very similar ways, but in a much more arcane language and couched in spiritual mythology. The first excerpt is from the Apocryphon of John, found in the Nag Hammadi library, where it literally describes the shimmering light beyond, but also enveloping the material world, as I explained earlier when I called it the separated waters. The context of this is interesting because this is just after God has revealed himself to Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, which is, in my opinion, a symbol of the ego, who thought he was the only God, and the other archons who can see the image of God in the shimmering waters above matter. And the whole aeon of the chief archon trembled, and the foundations of the abyss shook, and the waters which are above matter, the underside was illuminated by the appearance of his image which had been revealed. And when all the authorities and the chief archon looked, they saw the whole region of the underside which was illuminated, and through the light they saw the form of the image in the water. Another direct reference to the shimmering watery light one sees after mystical union comes from the 4th century Christian mystical work called the Book of the Holy Hierotheos. The use of the term firmament in this excerpt is important because the author is distinguishing the physical firmament or atmosphere, as we would call it today, to a mental spiritual firmament that we must rise and cross over in meditation to achieve spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. Now, the firmament appears to the mind as a kind of dim light, for indeed the nature of the material firmament was produced by condensation from the outpouring of light. Yet, however that may be, that firmament which was, quote, the barrier in the midst, unquote, which Christ first rent asunder, is rent asunder before ascending minds. And when the mind has been accounted worthy to ascend above the firmament, it is then becomes as a babe that has just been born, that has just arrived out of darkness into light, and it beholds that dim and fluid light which is above the firmament, which the prophetic word has named water, namely because of the nature of that light is very thin and fluid, just as also water is very fluid if it be compared with other solid bodies. For let no one make the mistake of believing that the essence of water is in the heavens. Here is an excerpt that describes the Christ consciousness hidden within us all, which also includes a reference to the golden circle of light and the star in the middle over a dark blue background when it says light dwelling in light. It speaks of the silent voice one hears and links back to the secret spiritual baptism with reference to water of life. It also describes the interconnectivity of everyone in Christ consciousness one comes to know through mystical union upon the mystical cross. As I descended to the midst of the underworld, and I shone down upon the darkness, it is I who poured forth the water. It is I who am hidden within radiant waters. I am the one who gradually put forth the all by my thought. It is I who am laden with the voice. It is through me that the Gnosis comes forth. I dwell on the ineffable and unknowable ones. I am perception and knowledge, uttering a voice by means of thought. I am the real voice. I cry out in everyone, and they recognize it, the voice, since a seed indwells in them. I, the thought of the Father, and through me proceeded the voice, that is, the knowledge of the everlasting things. I exist as thought for the all, being joined to the unknowable and incomprehensible thought. I revealed myself, yes, I, among all those who recognize me. For it is I who am joined with everyone by virtue of the hidden thought and an exalted voice, even a voice from the invisible thought, and it is immeasurable since it dwells in the immeasurable one. It is a mystery. It is unrestrainable by the incomprehensible one. It is invisible to all those who are visible in the all. It is a light dwelling in light. It is we also who alone have separated from the visible world, since we are saved by the hidden wisdom, by means of the ineffable, immeasurable voice. And he who is hidden within us pays the tribute of his fruit to the water of life. The term bridal chamber has been used as far back as the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it has esoterically meant the same thing since its original usage. Spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross happens inside the bridal chamber, which is in the brain where the mystical cross meets. As I explained, it's commingling of your spiritual energy with the divine, where two become one in blissful spiritual essence, like having a wave come back into the ocean to which it belongs. To be completely honest, the feeling of this experience actually feels like a sexual orgasm, with the orgasmic feeling dialed up to an indescribable level. When I said earlier in a previous video, it feels like every atom of your body is pouring forth orgasmic energy, I wasn't joking. There is a reason why there is sexual language in religious texts going back to the Sumerian and Akkadian mythologies. I can re-explain this entire experience through sexual metaphors, and it would actually be just as accurate, if not shocking to some people. That being said, I will simply point out the obvious and you can connect the dots. We have a vertical rising energy that meets and enters a horizontal oval shape opening, only to explode in energetic, watery spiritual communion as a result of these crossing energies meeting in the brain. This crossing of the opposing energies in the brain during mystical union is what the bridal chamber is and has always been. And just as an aside, if we go back and revisit Shiva, the Shiva Sutra quote, clearly it's speaking of the exact same thing. It's talking in the same exact language. Shakti being the female energy and Shiva being the male energy, and when they meet, that's the culmination of samadhi. That is the culmination of mystical union, which is exactly what I'm saying here. And Jesus even refers to himself as the bridegroom and his male apostles as his guests. Again, this is a spiritual metaphor, not something that has to do with physical sexuality at all. Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast." Or this version of the same verse from the Gospel of Thomas, but this time he does not refer to the disciples as guests, and specifically mentions leaving the bridal chamber. When he says this, he's talking about Christ consciousness, because when he leaves the bridal chamber, then mystical union ends, and one has to fast and pray or meditate to join with Christ consciousness in the bridal chamber during mystical union. They said to Jesus, "Come, let us pray today and let us fast." Jesus said, "What is the sin that I have committed, and wherein have I been defeated? But when the bridegroom leaves the bridal chamber, then let them fast and pray. If anyone becomes a son of the bridal chamber, he will receive the light. If anyone does not receive it while he is here, he will not be able to receive it in the other place. He who will receive that light will not be seen, nor can he be detained, and none shall be able to torment a person like this, even while he dwells in the world. And again, when he leaves the world, he has already received the truth in the images. The world has become the aeon, eternal realm, for the aeon is fullness for him. This is the way it is. It is revealed to him alone, not hidden in the darkness and the night, but hidden in a perfect day and a holy light. The bridal chamber idea will come up in future videos, so it's important to at least clearly define it in terms of its esoteric meaning for now. Now that I have explained the experience spiritually, energetically, as well as physically, I wanted to go over some of the other profound results from spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. Depending on how deep your experience is or becomes, there are generally a few things that are universal. The tingling bliss can last for hours, days, weeks, or months. The experience is almost like charging your life force like a battery. You can go a long time without eating food or drinking water, and it's not forced at all. It's just you have filled yourself and nourished yourself with cosmic Christ energy, and you need very little sustenance. Jesus answered them, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on the very word that comes from the mouth of God." As stated previously, in India, the mouth of God is known as the medulla oblongata, which happens to be at the point where the cross meets, and also, as I stated earlier, where ancient artists depicted the cross behind Christ's head. The commingling of your energy with the divine waters above, bestows a profound inner knowledge of the unity of all things by experience, not by the intellect. It's the spiritual intuition and not worldly intellect that is what Christians call Gnosis. It's one thing to say all is one, it's another thing entirely to experience that truth. This is extremely important because it is the dividing line between many of the early so-called Gnostic Christians and those Christians that never experienced the spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. Those bereft of this experience can only hold to their theological and intellectual arguments, which are often ruled by their own egos. On a personal level, I have a deeply developed spiritual intuition as a result of many experiences of repeatedly attaining spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. There is a divine, silent voice that speaks through thought, and sometimes comes out of nowhere by placing thoughts into the mind right when it needs it, and least expects it. As an example, I will hear someone say something out of nowhere, dozens of insights will flood into my mind about what this person thinks, feels, struggles with, often simply by a mere statement from that person. Given enough time, if the situation presents itself, I will intuitively say something that completely wakes people up to a reality they never thought of, often changing the direction of their lives. This is what Gnosis really means in the Gnostic texts. There is an incredible divinized intuitive knowledge that blossoms in such a way that it is clearly practical for nearly every situation you might find yourself or others in. The reason why the Gnostics spoke the way they did about it and why the church fathers were so incredulous against them is because the Gnostics can easily recognize those who have attained spiritual baptism, bestowing Gnosis upon the mystical cross, by way of the tangible results that is obvious to one who has attained it. Those results are the same in everyone who experiences them. Again, Marguerite Porete expresses this beautifully. It is true, says the soul, and there is nothing else, and therefore, if God wishes me to have such great knowledge, let him keep and prevent me from knowing him. For otherwise, says the soul, I should have no knowledge of him. And if he wishes me to know myself, let him also take away from the knowledge of myself, for otherwise I cannot have it all. It is true, says love, Lady Soul, what you say. There is nothing more certain to know. There is nothing more profitable to have than this work. So when certain hateful church fathers display their intellectual disgust and heap theological dogmatic scorn upon those they considered enemies, mainly the Gnostics, they betray themselves as not having achieved mystical union in the spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. Anyone who has genuine experience would find it antithetical to act in that aggressive, jealous, and ego-driven fashion. Because they had these experiences, they felt no need to bow down to the institutional hierarchy of the growing Catholic Church. One could no longer deny the essential oneness of reality after it has been experienced. Before the experience, you had specific family and friends, and now literally everyone are your family and friends because you've experienced the interconnected oneness of God. Then Jesus' mother and brothers came. Standing outside, they sent word to him and summoned him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, Look, your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you. And he answered them and said, Who are my mother and my brothers? And looking around those that were sitting around him in a circle, he said, Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. This early scene in Mark also shows that Jesus didn't just say these things, he was living by example, which the story sets up for the eventual saying in Mark 10:29-30. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, there is no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the gospel who will not receive in this age 100 times as much homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, fields, all with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. One can recognize the physical and psychological differences between people, but one knows that the spark inside of all people is the same light, like the idea of taking a flame from one candle and lighting another, and the flame that burns in both is the same fire, not separate. Endless theological intellectual argumentation can bring one to this kind of gnosis, but it is a very long and arduous process and still requires a state of grace. The experience of it humbles and obliterates nearly all internal and external arguments of egoistic dogmatic theology. The Church Fathers could not conceive of Gnosis as other Christian groups did, and as later Christian mystics would naturally pick up on. All they had was the intellectual, theological, dogmatic positions that they relied upon, where in contrast, the Gnostics seemed to have had their hands on an actual spiritual system which transcended the dogmatic, theological, and intellectual system via authentic spiritual practice, genuine experiences, practicality, and the profound intuitional effect it has on those who attain it, as well as the bliss, joy, deep love, and deep peace that it bestows. As a way of expressing this fact to you all, I give you the account of one of the Catholic Church's most important theologians, Thomas Aquinas. He is known as the Doctor of the Church and was an intellectual powerhouse, a prolific writer, intellectually arguing the theology of his day. He was no doubt a brilliant man, but after a lifetime of this exercise of deep intellectual theological argumentation and philosophy, he apparently achieved the true spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. He had some lesser experiences before, but nothing like this. This experience changed him to the point that he realized everything he ever wrote was basically worthless, so much so that he refused to finish his magnum opus Summa Theologica. Those of us that have experienced this as well intuitively recognize that St. Thomas Aquinas' experience was genuine. On the feast of St. Nicholas in 1273, St. Thomas Aquinas was celebrating Mass when he received a revelation that so affected him that he wrote and dictated no more, leaving his great work, the Summa Theologica, unfinished. To Brother Reginald, his secretary and friend, expostulations, he replied, "The end of my labors has come. All that I have written appears to be as so much straw after the things that have been revealed to me." When later asked by Reginald to return to writing, Aquinas said again, "I can write no more. I have seen things that make my writings like straw." Aquinas died 3 months later while on his way to the Ecumenical Council of Lyon. I would just like to point out that the world, and especially the internet, are so full of so-called intellectual theologians, academics, apologists, atheists, or just religious content creators and debaters arguing about Christianity from one end of the spectrum to the other. I can now count myself as one of them, in a sense. It's almost always aggressive and defensive, no matter where people spiritually or atheistically come from. More often than not, it seems to boil down to a battle between egos, or dogmas driven by egos. St. Thomas Aquinas is a perfect example that experience transcends intellectual arguments of theology. For such an erudite man to say that everything he ever wrote was straw after a lifetime of vigorously arguing his various Aristotelian theological positions is significant and a true sign of someone who experienced spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. I have seen more than a few miracles that were bestowed upon people and animals that were worked through me. I take no credit for these events because this power comes from the divine, and I was merely a willing and conscious vessel for that love and grace. At the height of attaining mystical union on a fairly regular basis, I had a long spiritual conversation with someone who mentally struggled much of their life. After I was done explaining a lot of what I have been explaining to you in this series, without even thinking about what I was doing, I touched them on their third eye, and a mere drop of that power that one receives from mystical union was transferred to them in a way that was truly miraculous. They changed in an instant, intoxicated with the divine love that I had charged within myself. This person did struggle again after a month and a half of feeling the after effects of that mere drop of divine bliss, but they eventually overcame some serious trials that were partly my trials as well. In the end, this person has a new lease on life in a way they could never have dreamed of. But ultimately, we all must walk through the fire of life's trials to reach the goal. The only other story I will sort of share here is a vision I had back in 2009. I have made a video about this already called Let's Get Personal, which I will link in the description, that goes through the whole situation leading up to the vision, what I saw and experienced, and how the practicality of that vision not only healed myself, but my ex-girlfriend as well. She was a person who had crippling anxiety most of her life, and it caused a lot of problems in our relationship. We were going through a terrible breakup where she cheated on me and tried to keep it a secret. When I found out what was actually going on, I demanded we have a phone call to finish everything between us. I planned on letting her know how terrible of a person she was in some of the most vicious ways I could think of. When we finally did speak, and I was about to launch into my vicious tirade, but suddenly I was swept up into a vision of her life, starting when she was very young and went through the years. I watched and experienced the kind of trauma that led her to be the way she was. I could see, hear, smell, feel everything she was experiencing during those moments, but I could also do the same for those around her, heaping scorn on her for one reason or another. I came to from my vision in just a few seconds of real time, but I was sitting in my chair speechless. I suddenly understood that each and every one of us has these aspects of our lives, shaped by the way people treated us as we grew up or treated others in front of us. For her, it created such an anxiety in her that she would fall apart the moment she got criticized for something and sometimes have a full-blown panic attack. Because of my vision, I realized that I had to forgive her or I would have just added on to all of those years of the same kind of abuse. I decided to help her find a good holistic doctor to help her solve the anxiety, and she did indeed cure herself. This is a very short rendition of this story, but you can find the whole story in my video if you want to take a listen. A few years ago, I came across a book called The Spiritual Brain by Mario Beauregard and Dennis O'Leary, which I loved, but something jumped out at me in the section covering near-death experiences. It's a description of a heart attack survivor who gave this account. All my life up till the present seemed to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic three-dimensional review, and each event seemed to be accompanied by a consciousness or of good or evil, or with an insight into cause or effect. Not only did I perceive everything from my own viewpoint, but I also knew the thoughts of everyone involved in the event, as if I had their thoughts within me. This meant that I perceived not only what I had done or thought, but even in what way it had influenced others. This description is an exact description of what I experienced in my own vision, but I wasn't dying or dead. The Gnosis it bestowed on me by helping me understand how people are shaped and formed psychologically from birth through one's teenage years is frankly incredible. As I discussed earlier in this video about the ego, I witnessed its creation in my ex and the results of everything that was done to her by people who also had similar but different experiences that shaped them. Being able to experience the thoughts, feelings of all the people within each scene I was shown gave me an understanding that no one in this world is not affected by these circumstances. Therefore, forgiveness comes easier when you understand that most people have no clue how so much of their early past shaped them into the mental and spiritual situations they find themselves in. When Jesus says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do," while being nailed to a cross, he can say this because he knows the truth that I just tried to share with you. The main thing I would like people to take from this is that when one achieves mystical union, this is one of the most beautiful gifts of knowledge bestowed on the aspirant. The serious spiritual mental release one gets from realizing this truth is truly a miracle. To end this section, I would like to say that there is much and more that happens as a result of spiritual baptism, but I am holding back some of this information due to its delicate nature. The story I told is enough. I can understand why so many ancient cults and religions have secrets meant for the elect. Even Jesus says, "Don't throw a pearl to the dogs." There are very powerful things that happen as a result of spiritual baptism upon the mystical cross. So I think it would be irresponsible to talk about those things until people have reached the spiritual maturity to realize it for themselves. Honestly, it's part of the spiritual journey anyways, and to experience these things for yourself will only solidify the truth of it all for you when it happens. What you gain as you progress becomes your own personal confirmation of the truth and its efficacy. My purpose here is to share all of this with you so you too can realize it for yourself. Thank you for joining me today. Please hit the like button to subscribe and share if you choose. If you want to contribute to the channel, all of those links will be posted in the description below. Until next time, peace.